Hi guys and welcome back. Today is day 3 of the Optimizing Your Workout series, and today we are on to lower body. We're looking at glutes, hamstrings, quadriceps and calves. So obviously we've got plenty of different movements we can look at for targeting each of those muscle groups, but predominantly we've got hip flexion and extension like a deadlift, but we've also got knee flexion and extension like leg extensions and leg curls. So we're going to go through roughly 5 or 6 exercises that cover all of those muscle groups and all of their functions. So we're going to be looking at predominantly at hypertrophy training. So there may be some variations in this routine, or things missing I should say, that would normally people would consider a must have in their lower body training, but we'll discuss why those things might be missing and why I've maybe changed them for alternative exercises. Okay, so first things first, warm-up. So for me, a warm-up is super important, particularly on lower body day. I have a few aches, niggles, pains, particularly in my knees that I've had for years and years and years, so I have to make sure that I'm really warmed up before I'm started. So there's a few areas I want to focus on, predominantly hips and ankles, because they're the main joints, obviously knees as well, but they have a little bit more mobility, so we want to get them moving well, get the blood flowing before we start lifting any weight. Okay, so like we did with the upper body warm-ups, we're going to go through a few exercises, particularly body weight, just to get those joints moving. So this exercise is called 90-90, so we're really focusing on opening up the hips through some internal rotation on one leg, but also some external rotation on the other. So this is quite difficult for me, my hips are a little bit tight, definitely to begin with. So I'm just trying to focus on getting as much range as possible, and then I can progress and get more movement through. So next we're going to go into a bodyweight squat with an overhead reach. So we're tackling a few things here. We've got some hip work, we open up the ankles by forcing the knee over the toes, and we're also opening up the thoracic spine with that overhead reach. So you can see I'm a little bit stiff here because I'm still warming up, but hopefully as I move through, my movement's going to improve. Okay, and next we're moving on to an inchworm or a walkout into world's greatest stretch. So this movement's going to pretty much tackle everything. We've got some hamstring work, so we're starting from a standing position down into the walkout, and then we've also got a nice hip opener when we bring the foot close to the hand, and then also some T-drills, some thoracic rotation when we rotate and reach for the ceiling. So this is going to open up the whole body. So exercise 1 of our leg day is the RDLs. A few things to consider here with the RDLs, or stiff leg deadlifts, whatever you want to call them. There is a slight variation between the two. Stiff legs should be with very minimal bend at the knees, flexion at the knees. With RDLs, you have a slight bend at the knees. But the key is to focus on range of motion, so getting a nice stretch for your hamstrings, but not compensating through the back. So often when you see people trying to get a nice full stretch, you'll see that the movement actually ends up coming from the spine rather than through the hips. So the key is to push the bum back as far as you can, stretch down as close to the floor as you can get while keeping the tension on the hamstrings and not on the back. As I say, this exercise is for the whole posterior chain, so you will get some lower back work, which is why, as we mentioned earlier on in the series, we didn't do any deadlifts on back day. So we left the conventional deadlifts out, and instead we're going to do RDLs today. Okay, so moving on to exercise 2, we're going into the hack squat. So if you're lucky enough to have one of these in your gym, make use of it. For me, I feel like this is one of the best pieces of machinery when it comes to leg training. So this is actually going to be our squat movement or variation for today. Obviously, depending on feet placement and how you perform this maneuver, you can obviously target different areas of the body. So we're going for a nice low and narrow foot placement to really put emphasis on the quads. If you struggle with this and getting full range of motion, start a little bit higher and wider, build up that depth and that capacity, and then look at bringing them down a little bit and a little bit closer together. That's going to increase the activation of the quads. Okay, so moving on to exercise 3, maybe an exercise that a lot of you haven't done before, we're going into split squats. So there's a multitude of ways you can do split squats, depending on how you load the weight. You can do dumbbells, barbell, you can do back supported, you can do front loaded, whatever approach you take, but I do recommend doing some form of split squat. They're great for increasing the health of your knees, hips and ankles, and we're really focusing on range of motion. So we want to get the knee as far forward as possible, so really amplifying that ankle mobility. So nice, long split stance. So we've chosen to dumbbell load these, and then we're going to push as far forward as we can, down nice and low, and then we're pushing back. So as you can see, we've gone for a front foot elevated variation, which just helps us work on range of motion a little bit more. So I would suggest starting with front foot elevated, and then you can progress by going flat foot on the floor, and then rear foot elevated, or a variation of a Bulgarian split squat, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So depending on things like stride length, where you're loading the weight, depth, they're all going to have a factor on determining whether it's predominantly quads, predominantly glutes, etc. So play around with it, see which you prefer. Okay, so moving on to exercise 4, we are now going into leg extension. So leg extensions are one of the only exercises where we can really load up what we call terminal knee extension, so full extension of the leg. So it's really trying to focus on shortening that quad. There are not many other exercises that can load that stage, just because of the position that we're in. So when you use this exercise, you really want to focus on getting that full extension. So range of motion is key. All the way under you, full extension. Often you see people on leg extension going super heavy and doing half reps. You're not really going to benefit from this, and you're probably just going to put a lot of stress on your knees. So go a little bit lighter, potentially do some higher reps, full extension. Okay, so moving on to exercise 5, we are going with a hamstring curl. So obviously there's a multitude of different hamstring curls. You've got lying, you've got seated, you've got standing. Ultimately, it's not going to make a huge difference which one you use, but for the purpose of today, we're going with seated. So you do want to actually try and use both variations to go through a period of using lying, go through a period of seated. Usually the benefit of a seated leg curl as well is that you're fixed. So you have your upper leg locked in, which means your technique should be better because you're in a little bit more of a restricted path of movement. And when people are lying and they're doing the hamstring curls, often you'll see their hips lift up off the machine. So just make sure when you're in a lying machine, you squeeze your glutes first, drive your hips into the pad, and then you're working on shortening that hamstring. So a tip about using a seated hamstring curl is try and sit nice and upright. So the hamstring curls in this gym aren't amazing, particularly the seated ones. So what we've got here is we've propped up the back of the seated leg curl with a small plate just to bring my hips slightly forward so I sit nice and upright. Okay, last but not least, we are wrapping up the workout with some calf work. So I know a lot of people always complain about their calves don't grow, but if you train your calves like you train every other muscle group and you spend a little bit more time focusing on them, they will grow. So we've left them at the end of the workout. We're going to do standing calf raises on the machine, just because if you do seated or standing, you actually get slightly different focus on parts of your calves. So you have your soleus and your gastroc. Depending on which one you do, you'll spend a little bit more emphasis on one or the other. So we've chosen standing just to get real mass in the calves. So we're going to do a few more sets, a few extra reps, focusing on technique. So a nice shortened calf, which means really standing up as high as we can, almost on the balls of the feet / toes, and then a nice big stretch down the bottom. No bouncing reps, making sure we pause at both the top of the rep and the bottom. Okay, so if you're like me and your calves are lagging a little bit, maybe move your calf exercise to the start of the workout. Often I get to the end of a leg workout and I'm kind of like, can't be asked to do calves, which is one of the reasons why my calves are shit. So spend a little bit more time on them, focus on technique, do them more than once a week. Maybe you can put them on the back of another session, but really focus on that technique. Train them like you would train your arms and they will grow. So that's it. So you've got 6 exercises there. We started off with the RDL, so that's focusing on hip extension, one roll of the hamstrings. We've then got the hack squats, which is a kind of our squatting pressing movement, focusing on the quads, and then we then go into the split squats. The split squat is a great exercise. If you have knee pain, lower back pain, definitely use these split squats. It may help out. I'm not saying it 100% will, but it may be an exercise that could be a game changer for you. We then go into hamstring curls and leg extensions, focusing on our isolation movements for both, and then we wrapped it up with some calf raises. So I hope you enjoyed that workout. Hopefully you learned a little bit during that video. As always, like, follow and subscribe. I appreciate all of your support, and next week we will see you back here for shoulders.